All right, it's good to have everybody out today, and I see everybody's made it to ATX for South by Southwest 2022 very safely. My name is Rico Lamitte. I am the founder of Canivision Global, also a co-producer and co-host of State of Cannabis News Hour, where you can get your daily dose. And I'm joined here by three incredible individuals from the industry also. And for today's panel, we're going to be starting with Christine De La Rosa, representing the people's ecosystem. I've known her for quite a few years now as well. My man Vladimir Bautista, also from Happy Munkey. He is the man behind the culture, the glue that holds New York, both ends of the industry together as well, and the man who needs no introduction as well, the legend himself, co-founder of Harborside and founder of Last Prisoner Project, Mr. Steve DeAngelo. Nice. Round of applause for everybody. So Canivision Global, my company, we're a decentralized media broadcast organization, and we believe it starts with the people. We are all one network, many voices, and the industry is built of three different lanes. So you have lifestyle, business, and wellness. We need all three sides of that industry to come together, as everybody on this panel knows, and we're at a very, very pivotal moment in the industry. All right, so for today's panel, we're going to be starting off with three different themes, three different topics that we're going to cover. We're going to try to get through them all within 15 minutes, so we have about 10, 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. See my man Dan at the back, he's my communication director. If you have questions that you want to ask, we're going to try to get to everybody, as many people as possible, but please line up behind the microphone here in single file fashion so we can try to rapid fire those and pay attention so we don't waste anybody's time on the panel as well. All right, so without further ado, let's get it going. All right, so let's start off. So we've all been in this industry long enough to see its transformation firsthand from all aspects. We know it ain't where you come from, it is where you are now. That's most important. So from an operator's standpoint, what is the biggest roadblock that you each have encountered along your journey so far, and how you've overcome it, and what keeps you up at night going forward? We're going to start at the end here. Ms. Christine De La Rosa.
Hi, everybody. All right. What was the hardest thing? I feel like it's always the same answer, and so I get bored with myself, but oh well. It's always access to capital. If you are a woman founder, a black founder, a brown founder, an indigenous founder, the biggest hurdle that you face is actually access to capital. And you can see that in every state that has social equity. There are tons, well not tons, but there are at least hundreds of unused licenses because people of color are never able to realize the profitability of their license. So what did we do to fix that? Well, first of all, we created a fund. So we have the People's Groups Fund, and that's a fund that funds BIPOC and women-led companies. So BIPOC, all people in the BIPOC and women-led companies. Can people say like, oh, BIPOC women? And that was really awesome. We've done really well. We deployed capital last year. We're deploying it again this year. So what we did to fix it is to like figure out ourselves, because we were not going to have access to that. But in learning that, I've spoken to about 120 founders in the last 6 months, some from legacy, some legal, but all of them pretty awesome business people, but they didn't fit my investment thesis. So the second way we're trying to fix that is we launched the first Cannabis DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Thank you. And if you don't know what that is, basically what that means is that we're going to ask community to fund founders. And because it's on the blockchain, we will not have the same regulations as SEC. And so that's the next thing that we're doing.
You gonna go ahead, Vlad?
How's it going? Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you all. From my perspective, you know, coming from the legacy market, crossing over to the legal, one of the biggest challenges I faced, and I see a lot of similar people face that are crossing over, is like the lack of mentorship and resources, as Christine said, is of course a major factor, but then the simple fact of like, you know, corporate and investors not taking you serious, not understanding the value in someone that doesn't have it on a spreadsheet, you know, because even though sometimes people like me might have more experience than somebody that has things on a spreadsheet. It's harder to get corporate and the above board cannabis to understand these things, and that's part of our mission with Happy Munkey and in New York is helping people understand that it's not a charity case. It's actually an asset to have people like myself and millions of people like me throughout the country that we're in the legacy market and across and over that can bring in valuable experience over to the other side and have the cultural competency to deal with our community. So that's what I've seen our biggest challenge are.
So, well, just generally speaking, the biggest obstacle to achieving my goals has been the federal government of the United States. But leaving that aside for a moment, I've been working for several months now in the legacy cannabis community in New York. And what I found is that there's a really basic issue when you start talking to legacy operators about the legal market and entering the legal market, and it's safety. Right? We're talking about people who have spent 20, 30 years working to develop a clandestine operations, and that clandestineness, that hiddenness, is what's kept them safe. It's what's allowed them to survive. It's what's allowed them to provide for their families. And so asking someone who's already got a livelihood that depends on secrecy to surface themselves, to file license applications, to open up their lives to scrutiny is a very, very big ask. What's the answer, I think, is an amnesty program. It's really what needs to be at the beginning of every legacy opening to the legacy market. You have to make it safe first. There has to be an amnesty provision, and that has to be done in such a way so that it doesn't put people at danger when they do it. So that's really the main obstacle that I've seen. The other obstacle is just convincing regulators that it's not only right to bring legacy into the market, but if they want to have a single, unified, healthy cannabis market, absolutely necessary.
So, Christine, you said that access to capital for BIPOC and women specifically. Do you have any specific instances where you ran into that issue in the past that somebody from the audience could draw from and can empathize with prior to you guys building your program at the People's Ecosystem, please?
Yeah, when we transitioned from legacy to legal back in 2018, one of the biggest things that I found was there was a lot of people that wanted to talk with us. And we actually went through this whole process with a single investor out of New York. And we had our operating agreement, our definitive agreement. We had closed on $50 million for the company, not the fund, the company. We had opened up bank accounts. We were getting stuff transferred. And the day before the first $10 million was to hit the bank, he called me. I was in New York. I was in Brooklyn. Closing that deal, and he called me and he's like, okay, great, I'm ready to transfer the money. And I was like, woohoo, I'm like, this is so awesome. He's like, but I'm gonna need 55% of your company. We had never talked about that level. We had talked about what we would do incrementally as I raised the valuation of the company. And I will tell you, that was probably the worst day of my life because I had already hired, I had signed documents. Like, I was like really thinking, this is a real thing because the lawyers had been in it, the accountants had been in it. It wasn't just me like signing some paper on the sly, in the back of a bar. And so I had hired people. We had hired people, we had employed people, we had done everything. And I had to call my co-founders, and it was like 9 o'clock New York time. So it was like 6 o'clock California time. And I said, I have to turn this down. I said, we're gonna have to start letting people go. We're gonna have to totally repivot our company because we can't accept those terms because he is stealing from us. And to tell my co-founders the thing that we had been working on for about 4 months to get closed, that we were not going to be able to do it and that we shouldn't do it, was just, I could start crying right now, to be honest with you, because you really believe, like, that investors are working on the up and up. And what I've learned is that you really have to vet investors, and you really have to know, and there's always, never take bad money, always take good money. And this guy, of course, was going to be, I could have signed that, right? I could have been like, oh, well, at least it's $50 million, but I would never have trusted him. I would never have been able to work with him, and I would always have this bad taste in my mouth. And what we found was that there were good investors. There was good money, and that's what you want when you're getting investment, is to make sure that you have people that are part of your team, that they're being integrative, that they're helping you build capital and not being extractive, trying to take from you. And I think that that's one of the biggest things. I mean, we can look at LA for that, right? Rico? That has been the thing, that they have just really hurt BIPOC and women companies by just being like, oh yeah, we'll give you the money, but we're going to take a 95% management fee, and you're not going to get any of the money.
Like an unsavory thing a lot of people have said, they've actually compared social equity to just straight up predatory lending.
Yeah.
Like 100%. We're already used to that in the hood, and it's just continuing to move forward.
Yeah.
So in sake of time, though, Vlad, going from, you always say you're all about the culture and not the clout, right? And when we first spoke, was like 2.5, maybe almost 3 years ago, you told me you're all about going from the boulevard to the boardroom. I've never seen this in practice until the even more so than the Van Gogh exhibit that you guys came through with this year, turned the industry on its head. What was the thinking behind that? Like, nobody ever thought that brothers from Washington Heights would come up in New York and team up with a classical artist crowd in New York and do what you did. Like, what was your thoughts with that, and how did you get people from both ends of the culture to come together?
Well, that goes into, another one of our taglines, which is like we're the nexus between corporate and culture. And what we've noticed is it's been like a social experiment, doing events in New York. When we started, doing these events where we gathered everybody, that at the end of the day, I think we've proven that it doesn't matter what race, sex, religion, class you are. When you get everybody together in a room, a lot of people have similar issues. Everybody's stressed out. Everybody needs a joint to forget about it. So I think that, like what we did on 420 at the Bobby Van Steakhouse and then at the Van Gogh was just like the culmination of that, especially after 80 years of prohibition in New York and everything being underground. People really feel liberated, and we were just like the vessel and the conduit for them to celebrate together. So I think the Van Gogh was like the pinnacle of that recently, because art isn't as inclusive as other industries. So for an institution like them that's in 19 cities, 3 countries, to publicly, proudly do an event with a culture company like us, I think was a big deal. And we sold it out twice, not one issue. All these different people in peace, love, and happiness consuming in Manhattan is the opposite of what they thought when you let somebody like us run a situation like that would happen. And I think that's what we're here to prove.
And I'm not gonna lie, we've had the Van Gogh exhibit in LA for quite some time. It was supposed to be the mecca of cannabis, and I was pretty pissed off to see that we did not have weed available at our Van Gogh exhibit. So big props to you on that, and gaining that community's respect as well. And one last one with you, Steve, before we move on. Just gaining the respect of these legislators, right? You've made a huge push over the past, was it like 3 years since you guys went public at Harborside? 4 years? No?
3 years.
Yeah, like bridging that gap and like helping folks get out of prison. What is the biggest roadblock that you continuously see time and time again when you're talking to these people and you're trying to get them to understand the language that we speak?
We're talking about prisoner work here?
Not just with the
Or
prisoners,
legislators.
The legislators.
Well, the biggest challenge that I'm facing in convincing legislators to take the legacy market seriously, there's really 2 challenges, right? You've got a bunch of legislators, especially those from upstate, who just view legacy operators as criminals, and they say things like, well, Steve, those are the people who didn't play by the rules. We're in the practice of rewarding the people who do play by the rules, right? And then other legislators, or other really more regulators, some of the people who are in charge of implementing the program in New York, don't even really want to hear the word legacy. Right? If you bring the word legacy up, they say, don't even say that word. It doesn't exist in our law. All they want to talk about is social equity, which is important, but it's not quite the same as legacy. So just breaking through that, and the way that I do it is by saying, look, it doesn't matter whether you think the people who carried this plant through the darkness of prohibition were heroes, like I do, or whether you think that they were criminals. If you want a healthy cannabis market, you have to give licensing priority to legacy operators. You have to let legacy operators surface and operate the market that they have already built in the beginning. It has to be the first legal step. Because if you do not do that, what we learned in California is that legacy operators will just stay outside the system. And without taxes and without regulation, we will outcompete it.
The trap will never die. So that's a great segue into...
I mean, without a beat. Go, Rico.
So that's a great segue, Steve, into our next conversation, our next conversational track about New York. So New York made big waves last week. They just announced that they're going to be moving forward with retail operation with licenses going first to applicants with prior cannabis convictions. So starting with Mr. New York himself in the middle, Vlad, can you tell me, what was your reaction to the news and what do you think this could mean for social equity going forward overall?
Well, as Steve said, I think this is deeper than just social equity, right? Because, sort of social equity is sort of like a broad term that encompasses a lot of people and is very important. But I think this was deeper than that because this was the first 100 people that are eligible to get licenses are people that were either arrested for cannabis or have a family member that does. So I think that this goes a little deeper than usual, and I think that news was amazing, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, just to even just have the consideration that the legislators are thinking about, the people that will harm the most first. Aside from wherever it ends up and how things end up unfolding, just morally, right? Neighborhoods like where I grew up at, Harlem, Washington Heights, Bronx, Brooklyn, you feel like you're forgotten. You know what I mean? And these people have counted you out. So just from a moral perspective, I just saw all these communities reach out to me and feel like we matter. We were at the forefront of this historical thing that's happening. We're at, they care that we exist and what happened to us. So just that is deeper than what people can imagine because like I said, it starts to feel like you're forgotten, like you're an outcast of society. All these corporations and investors are coming to make billions of dollars. The people that were harmed the most feel ostracized and persecuted now. Finally, we matter, we exist, and we are a priority in this process.
I love that, man. I love it. I'm just happy for y'all. Steve, what was your reaction, and what do you think it means for the overall social equity conversation going forward?
Well, I think it was a great statement, but I'm not sure that in effect it's going to have as much effect as it was a PR statement. So, the announcement was made to a lot of fanfare that the first 100 licenses in New York were going to go to formerly incarcerated people. But when you drill down into the details, you find out that in order to qualify for one of those licenses, you had to have filed 2 years' worth of tax returns showing that you are at least a 10% owner in a profitable company. Now think about that. People who get out of prison, their lives are destroyed. They've got ankle monitors on. They barely are able to get jobs. And you need to have 2 years of tax returns showing you're a 10% owner in a profitable business before you get one of these licenses. That narrows it down just a little bit.
That's a good point. Is the legislation like set right now? Do you still have time to deliberate and time to change that, like before licensure actually comes out? Because in California, we know we're month to month. You know, they keep on moving the goalposts, right?
There's still time.
Retail's not supposed to even be here until 1 year in the future,
They
right?
have some commentary, 60 days right now, where people get to put their input in, I believe.
Not on that license, because they made that license conditional, so they got away from the 60-day comment period. Another thing they did that makes that legislation a bit problematic. Look, there is always an opportunity to change things, whether it's past their deadline or not. We can never let them set the rules of this combat and this battle, okay? So there's always an opportunity to change it. What we need to do if we want to change it is organize ourselves, okay? If we don't organize and liberate and heal ourselves, nobody is going to do it for us. And this is the great challenge in the legacy community. Again, because the legacy community has kept itself safe, has survived by not coming out, and even just persuading legacy operators to come to a meeting to discuss their interests together, it's a big ask.
Right. The idea is big, but it's all about the execution. And man, if you guys can get that right, man, I know the rest of the world is watching. And what are your thoughts, Christine, on this? What were your thoughts as a team, your reaction, and what does it mean going forward? 'Cause you've been in the social equity fight longer than most as well.
So if you watch TikTok, there's this thing that says, "Don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious." And I'm gonna tell you, be suspicious. Look, I could say a lot about New York, but I'm not from New York, and Vlad's from New York, so I always take his word because he's lived experience. But here's what I will say. In the legislation, it says that there's supposed to be an advisory council to the board. It is literally written into the legislation. They have not formed that board, which is supposed to come from community members. And when asked in January when they would form the board, they said it is not a priority. That was on one of the calls that they did. This is why you should be suspicious. Because if you have something in legislation that says you need to involve community members to be able to talk to the board about what the community wants, and they don't think that's the priority, that is actually your answer. So I don't care what fanfare they pull out, I don't care what they say, there is a bunch of smoke and mirrors happening, and you don't even have to talk about that. Just ask them, where is the advisory board that's supposed to come from community? As you're making these regulations, as you're making these transfers, if you're doing this roadshow about the $200 million debt fund, where are the people that are supposed to advise you? And you need to keep asking that every time you talk to somebody in power until they tell you why not. Because that is your clue as to what's going to happen in New York if they're not going to honor this very basic thing that's in the legislation.
Right. And it's very funny that you say that, because when this came out at the same exact time that Governor Hochul is going through her own little controversy, you know, with the whole Ascend Wellness and MedMen ordeal that's being played out on all the front pages, right? So it might be a huge smokescreen, you know, that they're trying to put out and trying to get people excited. But we know in California, I'm rooting for you guys so hard, but they've come out with so many positive things just to keep us calm. But it was 3 years before the first social equity licenses started getting rolled out. You know, we had countless people when me and the other activists were on the ground marching and everything. We had, I think you were even down there sometimes, Christine. We had hundreds of people at City Hall. Like literally hundreds of people, like 400 or 500 people, everybody testifying every single time. The last one was a Zoom, and there was 12 people on the call. Yeah, so about 80% of people went back to the trap. Then you have the people that were in corporate America who left their corporate jobs. COVID hit, there's no job for them at all anymore. I even had somebody on my staff went homeless. They were from corporate America, saved up $200,000, 20 grand a month in rent for 3 years, and nothing, right? So we gotta stay vigilant and we gotta stay connected.
Do you know how many of the 300 social equity licenses in LA have been realized? Do you have an idea about that?
I can find out within an hour.
Yeah, I would like to. I think it's less than 10 actually. From what I can, if I'm counting all the people I know, it's less than 10. And this is the thing I worry about, those 100, just like Steve said. Look at the fine print. It's not for us.
That's actually one of the reasons why I started Canivision. We had this call, me and Vlad had this call a couple of years ago. One of my mentors, I didn't have the permission to say their name, but they actually lost licenseship during COVID. So we had all these raids going on throughout the city, and the people who were getting raided were not the trap shops. They were the licensed operators. And everybody, Forbes, Benzinga, Green Market Report, they were all reporting on record revenue, like from this firm to that firm. What they weren't reporting on is all the trappers were still, they were the ones thriving, and all the people that were legal licensed entities, everybody's going under, right? We were in the, I think it was mid-2020, and we had 3 original pre-ICO owners left in Los Angeles that were black. We had 2 that were Mexican. Out of the 185 licenses that were operating.
And then just look what they did to the Jungle Boys like the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it
for
happens to the best.
$62,000 after they paid $1.8 million in taxes and they raided them.
You tell me one thing, if you're running, I don't know, a donut shop or whatever, and you are a month behind on your taxes, you respond to that letter, are the cops gonna come in and raid you? Is the SWAT team gonna come in there and raid you? No. They don't treat us like human beings at all. So what you're saying, 100% true, Christine. Like, we have to watch each other's backs, and that's why we're having this panel right now, because we gotta come together as a community. Whether you are on the business side, wellness side, or on the lifestyle and the culture side, we gotta come together because we're all gonna get wiped out by big businesses and big government if we don't keep our eyes open. My man over there, yeah. All right, so final question here, about 10, 12 minutes on this one, then we're gonna go to questions. We're approaching the most important midterm election for the industry, and I think that America, I think also in America as a whole, right? You know, Trump is buzzing around still, and we have nearly 40 states legalized, and the conservatives are currently owning the narrative in our industry. So, what are your teams doing to prepare to adjust for possible federal legalization under Republican rule, where it most likely will be more about business than the people? Start with you, Steve.
Well, I think that we really need to fortify our castles, right? The places where we're strong, we really need to make sure that we remain strong. And so in states like New York, where there is a viable regulatory path for people of color, for social equity folks, for legacy operators to get into the business, we really need to do things like we're doing right now, which is drill down into the details. Don't take the pronouncements of the regulators at face value. Make sure that as we're building the walls that are going to defend us, that we build them thick and that we build them strong. I believe that we're in the next few years for a very, very difficult time in this country. Whether or not the Trump folks win through the ballot box or attempt to win through guns, it's going to be a really, really difficult and contentious time. And I think that all of us need to build our defenses and build our walls thick and strong. So look at your local laws. Get in with your local officials. Join your community boards. Run for city council. Plug in, right, because the storm is coming.
Indeed. And Christine?
You know, we've done a lot of meetings with a lot of federal legislators over the last couple of weeks. We've done lobby days, right, for NCIA. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is the fact that a Republican has come out with their own form of the cannabis, like, you know, regulating cannabis.
Is it Nancy Mace?
That's exactly right. I wasn't going to say her name, but okay. But anyways.
Bring her out. Come on.
But one of the things that I think that's going to be super important is that not only do we get involved in the, you know, local government, like Steve says, which I totally agree with, like that's something that we are definitely for Frederica Easley's here, our Director of Strategic Initiatives, but also to get really down in the deep with the federal government, because the federal government is going to be, the federal legalization is going to be, whether it's descheduled or legalized, is going to be very important. So I'm going to tell you, don't wait to figure out what they're going to tell us to do. Be involved. And I didn't know it was so easy just to call, your local rep or your local senator and be like, hey, I need to talk with you. They have to talk with you. And so I would say really getting involved in that as well, because federal legalization could actually be an extinction event for small cannabis businesses. And so we just want to make sure that we always know what's going on, both locally and statewide, but also federally. So important.
Indeed. And Vladimir?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Steve and Christine in those aspects. And as far as myself and my organization, that's why we are so, going hard on the politicians in New York, because I believe that New York is ground zero of that battle. In other industries, we've seen that DC mirrors a lot of New York's legislation. And I believe that what happens in New York in the next 2 to 5 years is going to determine a lot of what happens in the rest of the country and the world. So that's why I'm always preaching to everybody in the industry that really cares to really understand that what happens in New York is going to affect their communities, whether they're from New York or not. So I think that that's ground zero of that battle. And if we can get it right there and show that doing things fair and equitable is better, because that's part of what we're trying to prove, right? That if you do things comprehensively, you lower the barrier of entry for legacy people, do actual true social equity. What happens, Rico? Customers get more tested cannabis. These people get to create generational wealth, more business opportunities. Then by default, the high tide raises all the boats. So even corporate ends up making more money. The state gets more taxes. So if this all works in that manner, I think that this philosophy is going to be adopted throughout the country and on a federal level. And that's why I feel like it's ground zero over there. And we need to really act like it's that important, because DC is watching, and what happens there will determine of how they roll this thing out on a federal level.
Exactly. It is.
Let me just add something there, right?
Hop in, Steve.
Because if New York can do what California has not done and welcome legacy operators into the system and show it in numbers. In California right now, the legacy market is 3 to 4 times the size of the legal market. If those numbers can be flipped in New York,
At least.
then we have a chance of really influencing DC.
Very true. And I would implore everybody right now, my home state, Virginia. I'm originally from Virginia. Look at what's going on in Virginia, right? Northam left, Youngkin came in, complete Republican takeover, and it's all about business. They're stomping out social equity. They're not letting people educate the masses, and they're letting the MSOs come in and own the conversation. So prepare, adjust, and just be vigilant. Like, I personally, I don't truly believe in political parties. I think, you have good people, you got bad people. I tend to be an anarchist in the middle somewhere, burn the whole thing down. But we have to work with what we're given, right? So whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats right now, and Joe Biden won't even mention cannabis when it can be a solution to absolutely everything that he listed in the State of the Union, we have to prepare going forward that it's just going to be conservatives that are going to be pushing the conversation, right? Do you have any feedback on that, Steve? You're down there doing the work with the prisoners, especially. How are we going to work with that going forward? How are we going to get these conservative lawmakers to really listen to what you have been building, even if there is a complete Republican takeover?
Well, unfortunately, there's a tension here between our goals, right? On the one hand, we all want legal cannabis, and we want to see a big and robust and healthy cannabis industry. On the other hand, we're tired of living in this world that was handed to us that is so inequitable, that is so unjust, that is so cruel. And we want to change, and we want to build a new world. So the way that you typically get folks like those Republicans is by dangling dollars in front of their noses. That's how we got legislators to vote for cannabis in the first place, was by dangling tax dollars in front of their noses, by dangling investments in front of investors. And it worked. You know, cannabis would not be as legal in as many places today as it is if we had not invited the investor class in. But now they've assumed an incredible role in our industry, way, way, way oversized. And so the social justice aspects of what we are doing are becoming, for me, equally important. I mean, there was a time where if somebody had said to me, Steve, I am going to vote against the federal legalization of cannabis because I don't like the way it's organizing the industry, I probably would have pushed back on that because I've spent 50 years trying to legalize cannabis at the federal level. I've spent the past 3 years trying to release the 40,000 people who are still in prison in this country. And I still get up and I see that an American is arrested every 37 seconds on cannabis charges. So the idea of not legalizing is painful to me. But I am almost there, right? Because if the corporations take over cannabis, it takes over one of the very last platforms that we have to build the kind of change that we need. So I would say that the easy way would be dangling dollars in front of them, but it's not a time for us to take the easy way. It's a time for us to do what I said before, to get ready for the storm. We have been in a very positive place for cannabis over the course of the last several years. It's not always that way. In 1978, Jimmy Carter, the President of the United States, came out in favor of the decriminalization of cannabis nationally. By that time, we had passed decriminalization in 14 states in the 1970s. And in 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected. And we had all of that rolled back in the most vicious kind of way that you can imagine. So it can happen again. And we can't always imagine that this is just going to coast forward without substantial resistance. We may be headed into a period where we need to put on some armor and steel ourselves up.
So theoretically, I truly believe that the New York model, should it work, is something that everybody else can look up to. Before that came out, I was like, fuck social equity. I'm all about the philosophy behind it. I'm all about like what it should be. But a lot of people don't realize social equity was a term made up by H.G. Frederickson in 1968, a white man in Idaho. It's a buzzword. That's it. Nobody can agree on what exactly social equity means. In California, technically, it's illegal. We don't have affirmative action in California. So you broaden the actual meaning of what it can mean. And that's why I've been beating my drum about reparations, period. And it pisses me off when people say, oh yeah, there's a chance for reparations for black people. Like, nah, not really. Reparations is putting money in our pocket, period, right? So what happens to the conversation, like overall, if everything implodes and social equity crumbles like it has everywhere else in New York? What next?
Well, that's why, the narrative and the conversation that's happening over there that's kind of taken like a bigger shine on the stage is the legacy to legal conversation, because this is something that we know what it is. And like you said, what social equity, we know legacy means somebody that was taking care of themselves financially, this is what they were doing to feed themselves and their families. So it's like more clear definition of what that is. So I think that has a better odds of sustaining and really having real impact. And it just doesn't only stay to black and brown people. If you no matter what color you were, if you really were getting down and you were doing what you were doing, it's all right, like you can get down too. But the whole point is that it's really easier to gauge than the whole vague social equity thing. So I think that it has better odds because it's something that's real. It's
tangible, right?
It's tangible, and it has economic empowerment for all parties involved. Like I mentioned earlier, economic empowerment for the community, economic empowerment for the industry as a whole, because we know that if you don't include the legacy, it ends up being way bigger than the legal.
But you guys are actually doing some programming that I have to mention as well. Happy Monkey's actually doing some programming that I absolutely love, because a lot of my homeboys that want to get in, every single one of them, like, oh, I'm gonna start up a dispensary, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do like, you got $5 to $10 million liquid. Do you have enough money for that initial runway? And do you have the heart to tell your family, I did not get a license 2 years from now when you're 300 grand in the hole? If you don't, there's other paths, right? And if you want to just like earmark what you guys are doing with the community out in New York, because I was like, man, that's my man Vlad out there. Tell us a little bit about that programming.
Yeah,
and how you've been able to connect with the people.
We have been like, really on tour with some of the regulators, speaking and really bringing them to the real neighborhoods that were impacted, and helping people understand that the way that the New York license is rolling out, like you said, everybody only thinks about cultivation, a dispensary, but there's so much more. There's consumption lounges, there is, co-op, there's micro grows. And on top of it, really being realistic with everyone and saying that everybody's not going to get a license, right? Because that would be a lie, saying that everybody, every person of color, everybody from marginalized communities is going to get one. But there are also opportunities to work for organizations that will and make six figures. And it's like
Facts.
Really necessary for everybody to bring their skills that have the cultural competency to serve our communities to this industry, because that's part of the issue now. That's why there's 10 medical ROs in New York. None of them serve our communities because they don't, of course, really care about our communities, but they don't have the cultural competency, even if they did care, to deal with them. So we have to deal with our communities. We have to be able to know that we have all the resources, we have the qualified people that look like us to serve our communities, and that's what we're trying to help people understand, that it's not as black and white as you're a grower or you're a retail owner. It's much deeper than that.
We have to become the bridge that they refuse to build, right? All right, so, and last question before we get to audience questions, just real quick, with Christine, the local gal out here. Speaking of that, what is the local Texas community? Because you live in Austin now, you're actually originally from, was it San Antonio? Yes. I remember, yes. Yeah. All right, weed does not kill your memory, it's a lie. All right, so what is the local community here in Austin doing to cultivate that educational space, that access to ancillary services and not just touching the plant to move forward? Because I think things are going to go lightning quick here in Texas once they realize they have to catch up to New Mexico, to Oklahoma, and everybody that's touching them is making money that they're not. So what are you guys doing locally to build up that?
I mean, there's so many things happening here locally that are really awesome. You'll see that there's a lot of CBD dispensaries called dispensaries, but they only sell CBD. Delta 8 came out in Texas first. This is when they started selling it. And I remember a friend of mine called me up and I went to the CBD store and they have THC there. And I'm like, it's not THC. I mean, it is, but it's a different thing. And we're like, what are they going to do? I go, well, I don't know what they're going to do. And they ended up not doing anything. So there really is, weed here in Texas. It's just not the best weed. But the people that are advocates are doing really great jobs of teaching people like all of the different things around terpenes, around profiles, around what you should be looking for. So I think they're really going to be prepared for when it does become legal. And everybody's like, oh, it's going to take forever to become legal in Texas. I'm like, no, it's not. Because let me tell you, there is a whole Republican thing happening here in Texas, and the way I know this is because I have now talked to 4 developers, different developers in different parts of the state. One of them who just bought 150,000 acres right outside of Austin and is about to put up a manufacturing. Republicans are going to pass this, and they're going to pass it, I think, very, very soon. And we're just like, Democrats are like, oh, but I don't know, or whatever. And they're like, no, we're going to come for it. And they're getting ready. And why wouldn't they? We have 4 entry points into Mexico. Mexico has 4 entry points into us. It's really it's the biggest, it's bigger than California, right? I think
Texas?
I think Texas is bigger.
Like, As far as land mass?
No, just as population and landmass. No, so then landmass. But it's like the second largest state. And what is really impressive, I think, about Texas is that the people here are so resilient. They figured out a way. They figured out a way with Delta 8. They figured out a way to have cannabis in Texas. And I think that makes, Texas people have always been so resilient around that. So I think that we're looking at legalization in the next 2 to 3 years. And I can say that just because what we see are these manufacturing and huge cultivations coming up.
How crazy is it, like 10 years from now, when we're looking at weed history, the most instrumental people when it came to legalization are going to be John Boehner, Mitch McConnell.
Oh my God.
And was it Charles Koch?
Yeah. And Pfizer.
You laugh because you can't cry no more. All right. So, any last statements anybody wants to make to about anything we talked about today before we head to questions? Last comments.
You know, when we were talking about the relationship of legacy to this impending takeover, and the relationship of legacy to social equity, legacy is really the sword that will defend social equity at the end of the day. Because if they do not create a just and equitable industry and welcome diverse communities into it, then the same thing that happened in California is going to happen everywhere, and the industry, the most of the industry, will continue to belong to our communities. Unfortunately, will continue to be subject to arrest and harassment. It was unbelievable to me. I'm in New York working on legalization in New York. I turn on the TV and I see SWAT team sheriff deputies from my home county of Alameda County in California, which supposedly legalized in 2018, taking down grow rooms and hauling people out in handcuffs. So let's make sure that doesn't happen anywhere else.
And the worst thing, burning the medicine. Like tons of medicine that could go to people who need it, who can't afford it. That's the thing that makes me sick about California sometimes, as a sick person myself.
It's true.
I just want to implore everyone here to understand that the time we're living in right now will not be repeatable. Cannabis will never go from prohibition to legal again. And if you really think about it, in this divided world where nobody agrees on anything, cannabis is one of the last things left that everybody agrees on. And I hope we don't take it for granted and really use it to repair so many other broken issues we have in this society. So thank you, and remember, we don't do it for the clout, we do it for the culture, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, indeed. Big round of applause for all three of these beautiful people. And if you guys have questions, please line up in the front here, single file by the mic.
Thank you. I'm Julia. I actually will be speaking tomorrow on the subject of cannabis small business. Spoke with Steve a couple of months ago in New York on the subject of equity, and actually just licensed the first cannabis home delivery operator in Massachusetts, which is an equity set-aside program. Very exciting. Took about 5 years from legalization.
Congrats.
Thank you. My question is actually about the consumer and the cultural shift that drives the consumer to a legal market as opposed to the legacy market. I won't get into Massachusetts and the failure or success of its equity and economic empowerment program, but this is the challenge that I have to face now, is consumer adoption of cannabis home delivery on the legal market. So I'm just curious how we convert consumers to accept and to enjoy the benefits of legal market testing, consistency, reliability, not feeling weird about making that purchase.
Who wants to go first? There's a lot we can say on this.
Well, you need to use market.
Just hop on it.
You need to use market forces. I mean, people are not going to transition if they're going to be buying a lower quality product at a higher price.
No booth.
And that's
No booth.
so, and that's mostly what the legal regulated systems are asking of consumers. What do you get in return? You get testing, okay, but most of us don't know people that have died from contaminated weed, so we're not terribly concerned about it unless we have compromised immune systems.
Facts.
Did we have issues back pre-2017? Did we have issues with mold, with any of the stuff that's going on right now that wasn't stomped out immediately within the cannabis community in California?
Yeah, we were. I mean, look, contamination of cannabis is a real issue, right? But it's not so much an issue that most consumers are willing to pay twice as much for lower quality weed. They're just not going to do that. So if legal systems want consumer adoption, they have to lower their taxes and they have to lower their regulatory burden and they have to bring in people who actually understand the market. If they do those three things, then consumers will transition. But consumers are not going to buy lower quality weed at higher prices just so they can go into a fancy store. That's not going to happen.
So Steve says taxes and pricing. All right, so Christine or Vlad?
Go ahead, Vlad.
So yeah, my opinion is that aside from that, or everything that Steve mentioned, to really get people to pay the extra and go through that, Julia, and cross them over, they have to believe that the people that are behind whatever delivery organization that they're purchasing from align with their values, is doing something impactful for the community. They have to really believe in either the brand or the people behind the organization to pay the extra and to do these things, because they have to know that at least it's making some type of positive impact on their community, or else, it makes no sense to pay the extra. So I think that plays a big role. We've seen that people that have real community engagement and really are tapped in with the culture do better in the legal market than the ones that don't.
So you got to have that community connection and product with integrity, right? And Christine?
You have to grow good weed. Like really, all of those things are awesome, but you really have to grow good weed. Otherwise, they're not going to transition over. And also, you have to be able to get your customers via authentic voice, right? We talk about this a lot in my company. What is the authentic voice? Because as a legacy operator, I'm not going to transition to a legal business unless I have the authentic voice where my consumers are going to come with me. And I think this is the hidden gem around the legacy operators. They've already cultivated that market. This is why we see a lot of the large MSOs just losing money hand over fist, with few exceptions. And one of the reasons is because they're trying to get a new market. They're trying to get other people to try cannabis that didn't try it before. And that's totally great. But why wouldn't you want to transition a legacy market person who already has their built-in brand, their built-in customers? That's how you transition them out. Not by trying to get them to go to someone else, but say, hey, here's a guy you've been buying from for the last 30 years. His son now does the grow. He is transitioning to the legal market. All of those customers are going to come with him, and they're not just going to stay with him. They're also going to try other things because they already know, oh, my guy's here. Otherwise, they're going to still go to the corner, or they're going to go to the underground dispensary because we're not transitioning them over. And that is a whole market, 4 times the market of the legal market, that could easily be transitioned if we brought. Not everybody's going to transition, right? There's still, cigarettes off the back of a truck. There's still, moonshine. There's all of that. But you'll transition those because the legacy market is moving in, and it's actually their consumer base.
I would also, Julia, I would also add education, period. You got to educate the people, let them know why lab-tested weed is more important, let them know why it shouldn't be all about the potency level, THC, 40% rather than the terpene profile and the entourage effect, right? Like why we have these different cultivars coming out, you have these different compounds that are coming to market, and why it's important that you know exactly what's in your cannabis before you consume it, right? Education is key to pretty much everything. So if you own a legal business, like that is the key to getting people like from the trap, like into your shop. And building that bridge, as everybody's talking about today, from legacy to legal. You have to build that bridge with the community and let them know that they're welcome. Also, we don't want to keep on blocking people out, because we will find a way, as Steve said, the trap will find a way. And the trap will win in the end if we continue going the way we have been going. All right? Let's go.
Thank you all for being here. Vlad, you mentioned earlier a little bit about folks on the inside and the outside sort of working together to get things done. As someone who works for an MSO, but my department works with communities directly, what are some ways, specifically with 420 or 710 coming up, that we can find activations that support this mission to move forward?
Well, that's why, you know, having people like you in organizations like the MSOs or larger corporate entities is very important, because I believe to make real change in society, you have to have people that rage against the machine and people that rage within the machine. So it's happy, you know, it makes me feel good that there's people like you in these organizations, because you have the cultural competency to talk to somebody like me and start these activations on 420 and 710. So I'm really happy and honored that at least these organizations are involving people from our communities, which is, I think, a very key and important step in the right direction if they plan on, you know, aligning with the culture and the community. So I think that's very important.
And, you know, given the voice that you have within the MSOs and anybody else who has that voice, I would make the argument that it is absolutely in the interest of the MSOs to make sure that as new markets open up, that legacy operators are given first priority licensing. Why? Because it's better to wait for a year or a year and a half or 2 years and have a big unified cannabis market that you can compete in than it is to have a situation like you have in California where they have access only to 20 or 25% of the market. The market will be 3 or 4 times bigger for them if they just let legacy go first. Everybody is going to do better.
And the big companies, they have the runway necessary to catch up. Period. Our communities do not. All right. Question.
Good morning, everybody. Just two
Morning.
questions. Best path to regulation for legacy operators, local, state, federal, that you can think of. And just to follow up with that, best systems of enforcement if you were the people writing those regulations.
We only have 3 minutes, so let's just start with the first question first. Can you repeat the first one?
For the legacy operators, what do you find is the best path to create for them to be able to start the businesses and to deal with all of the past issues that they've had, for example, federal, state, local? I know you guys have had these thoughts to figure out how do we get these legacy operators up and running, and so everyone politically can also be happy.
So the best path from the legacy to the legal market.
Well, what I believe is that you have to lower the barrier of entry. You have to, you know, federally we know we can't control things as much from an IRS perspective, but as Steve said, amnesty and really lowering the barrier of entry for them, giving them first access, like what's trying to be done in New York right now. And really the most important one is this doesn't go to government officials and regulators. This goes to more like big private corporate organizations. If you're really serious about supporting the transition for legacy folks and social equity folks, you need to provide and donate resources that they need to make a smooth transition. Because that is not up to the government, that is not up to the legislators. That is for the companies that have, you know, 10-figure market caps to put their money where their mouth is and really donate these resources so these people can be successful sustainably long-term, not just be a flash in the pan and get their licenses turned over in a couple of years.
But, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to give you just one thing that I think is very important if you're a legacy operator and you want to transition over. Do your financials. And I'm going to say this because people are like, all my financials are in my head. They were in my head too, and I had to write them down because people are like, I mean, we're used to not writing anything down, right? We keep, that's how I know we're amazing business people. Everything's in our head. We know exactly how much you owe us, when you owe us, and how late you are when you pay us. So put that on paper so that people can see what your traction was. What was your track record? How many customers did you have? How many, and you know, that's such an important thing because then when you're going to go get that license, when you're trying to talk to investors or people that are going to support you, having those financials really help you, especially in the grow section, I have to say.
And I would actually say, if you are a big-time trapper, find a good IP lawyer. Straight up. Make sure all your shit is copyrighted, trademarked out, because you have a brand, and that brand can transcend any barrier, and especially what's going on with Web3, Metaverse, like all of that. You can move forward, and you don't have to worry about getting a license. People with licenses are going to come forward to you because you've already cultivated that community before licensing was even in the conversation. Right? You're gonna have people coming to you wanting to put your logo, your name on their product. Why? Because you have the community that they want access to. All right. Any final comments? Can we do one more? We have time? Can we do one more question? All right. So how about let's do one more?
Thanks for making that time. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about legacy edible businesses. It's something we're really struggling with in the district. Thinking about how to make space when kitchen space is such a barrier anyway in so many of our cities.
Well, I think that the advice around trappers, and Rico's advice, applies pretty well to edibles manufacturers too. If you've been fairly successful and you've got a brand and you've got recipes and you have a record of sales and those sales have grown over the years, even if they're not really huge, if you can show these guys that you have a product, you have a brand, you have a market, and that market is ramping up, then you have a possibility of potentially leveraging your brand and your product into an already licensed company that has the capital to do those other things. Because these guys are sitting here, they've got kitchens, they've got grow rooms, they've got retail, and they don't know what to do with them.
So you can also, are you in New York?
No, the District of
District
DC.
Okay.
202.
Yeah, I was just going to say, have you ever tried talking to somebody who has a manufacturing license to see if you could co-locate and be able to be underneath their license? Are you allowed to do that in DC? Oh, you're on the legislative side. I got you. Oh, yeah. The best way would be a shared kitchen that y'all fund.
Yeah. Cool. I want to thank. Yeah. Shared kitchen space. Yeah. So. 100%. So I want to thank absolutely everybody for coming out today. Please give our panelists a warm round of applause. And everybody, when you guys go back to your respective regions and states, please talk to your legislators. Just like Steve was saying earlier, control the controllable, which is your own community first, and realize that stuff that happens from the top down is no need to panic. You just have to be aware, knowing that you're probably not going to be able to change anything when it comes to presidency or like U.S. senators, but be aware of what they're doing, what they're saying, and make sure that your local legislators know what the fuck that you want them to know. Period.